Today's episode tackles a critical intersection: productivity and family values through the lens of childcare policy reform. Joining us are the founders of the For Parents advocacy group, Madeline Simmonds and Fleming. Madeline and Jen are spearheading a campaign urging the federal government to rethink how childcare subsidies are delivered. Their petition has gained more than 18,000 signatures and widespread national media coverage. Their message: subsidies should be paid directly to parents, mirroring the NDIS, to give families control over how childcare support is used. The Productivity Commission's recent inquiry into early childhood has laid out 56 recommendations, including a pathway to universal childcare by 2036 and new subsidy reforms. But the question remains: will these changes deliver the flexibility families need today? Jen and Maddie, can you introduce yourselves and tell us how the For Parents group came together?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Fleming, and I'm a mum to two little girls, Elsie and Maeve. They're 2 and 4, and I'm one of the four co-founders of For Parents, which is a very new advocacy group around advocating for what parents need in public policy. And our first big challenge is the childcare subsidy. We came together at a local playgroup after discussing the stories that were coming out of Victoria in terms of the alleged abuse in childcare centres down there. And as mums, we felt this pull to those families in the fact that they don't have choice in the childcare model that they currently have access to at a subsidised level, and that they would have to get up tomorrow morning and take their children to a childcare centre because they need to work. So we wanted to explain and understand how the model currently works and explore how that could be expanded. So we started a petition at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night on change.org, and we pressed go live 8 weeks ago, and we've been running this marathon ever since.
Wow. And Maddie, how did you get involved?
So I was the fourth of the four mums that started it. One of the other mums, Amy, her name is, who has been involved in this. She reached out to me because it's a conversation we've been having, for years, I guess, as our kids grew up. So I've got three kids. They're 8, 5, and 1. And it's always something that, especially after COVID, that has been a bit of a bugbear for me, which is that the workplace has become very flexible, and I think a lot of employers are giving mothers in particular a lot of flexibility, and childcare just hasn't really kept up with it. And I just think it should be a bit more inclusive. So when they reached out to me and said, "Would you like to be involved?" I said absolutely. I've been talking about this for so long. It's time to put my money where my mouth is.
Wow, sounds like a really strong team. So there's obviously a lot of personal touch points here and lived experience that made you form the group. So what was the actual tipping point that made you decide to advocate for reform?
It really was the fact that we had a conversation at Playgroup about how the three of us and also Maddie use alternative forms of care. So for myself, I use a nanny 2 days a week, and I have my dad look after the girls 1 day a week so I can work. And all of us have different models of care that we use, but none of them are subsidised. However, all of our children are eligible for the childcare subsidy if they were to use a childcare centre. So it was that catalyst of watching those families in Victoria, feeling how so many parents around the country felt with the horrific allegations that were being portrayed in the media, and also that lived experience, as you say, of the fact that we don't use childcare centres for a range of reasons, and we can't be the only ones. So how are all those parents feeling today, and can we give them more choice in the sector? So that's how we decided. We thought a petition would be the best way to go because it does show momentum and the real force behind parents ultimately wanting change.
Yeah, right.
So for me, I use an au pair for my kids, and I have on and off for years since the first one was born, along with grandparents helping. But I guess I've always had flexibility with work. I mean, I often travel overnight, but when I'm not traveling, it means I get to be home. So a 9 to 5, 50 weeks of the year childcare system wasn't the best thing to support my family and my kids and our work lifestyle, if you like. And for me, I remember the last federal election, to their credit, the Albanese government, they increased the threshold for the childcare subsidy, which certainly made it more accessible to more families, but it didn't go that step further, and create flexibility in the actual type of care that they were using. It was a one model fits all approach, which I don't think suits modern families anymore.
Yeah, the work-life balance has definitely changed with roles and responsibilities, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you started a petition on change.org. That petition has reached more than 18,000 or gained 18,000 signatures. Lots of national media attention. It's only in an 8-week period. Did you expect this level of traction so quickly?
Well, we certainly hoped for it. It was definitely on the cards. We had a few goals that we really wanted to achieve. One of them was the Today Show, which we've done twice now, and that's great. But I think for us, we knew it wasn't just about media coverage. It was about giving parents the opportunity to have their voices behind a campaign that gave them hope that there might be change in the system. And I think, you know, to be really honest, we were almost naive, and Maddie can attest to this as well. We were almost naive in the fact of how many people this touches, and we've we get hundreds of messages in our little Instagram page every week of families telling us their stories, and the stories and the people that this impacts who are locked out of the system are so far reaching. It is from every corner of the country has a pocket that is in a childcare desert, or there are families who have a loved one, whether that be a sibling or a grandparent or a parent going through chemotherapy and they're immunocompromised, so their children can't go to childcare, or they've got a child with a disability who doesn't requires a level of care that can't be delivered in a childcare. They're shift workers, they're single parents, they live rurally. There are tens of thousands of people who cannot use a childcare centre as it currently stands, or don't want to use a childcare centre. And those people are either not working, or they're working less because they can't access the care that they need.
Yeah, I think when we found out that we were gonna be on the show with Carl Stefanovic, that was a bucket list kind of item ticked off. But to Jen's point, the more we talk to people, the more we realize, what kinds of families it's impacted. So, naively, I thought, oh, it's, people that just work, different hours and, beyond the hours that childcare offers, or people who are on the wait list. I remember with my first, I put him down on a wait list for childcare and he wasn't even born. I had to put, name unknown because I was 26 weeks pregnant and I was already stressed about getting back to work. But like Jen said, the more we talk to people, the more we realize there is these whole pockets of communities that just can't access it.
And you're it's not just mums, right, who are affected. As you mentioned, it's families. It's and then the
Yeah.
family unit's very different these days than how it used to be, well, at least when I was growing up, which was, 50 odd years ago. Um, so what have you heard most from other parents reaching out and other family members reaching out? What's their biggest frustration, with the current system? And perhaps you discussed this on, with Carl and Sarah on the Today Show, but for those who haven't heard that, can you share some of the frustrations with the current system?
Yeah, so well, there are so many things that we hear from families, and I think because we're also living it, we can really relate to those people. There are stories that parents are traveling 300-kilometer round trips to get to a childcare to work 1 day a week because that's the only 1 day they can get into childcare. But that's their only option. We had a lady in Tasmania. She travels 140 kilometers a day for 3 days a week for childcare because she has no other options. We've had families, a physiotherapist reach out to us this week. She has an immunocompromised child. She can't go back to work because her child would need to go into childcare, and that puts her child at a significant risk of severe illness. But if she doesn't do her registered hours, she loses her registration as a physio. There are no options for these people apart from the fact that they have to make a sacrifice, and they're just three stories of the hundreds that we're hearing. The biggest frustration is that it's a one-size-fits-all system, and that you can only receive a subsidy if your child is receiving care in a centre or an approved family daycare. there is no recognition of the village that everyone speaks about when you have a child. You need the village. Well, the village is grandparents. We have to acknowledge that for most people, the village is grandparents. And that is only if you have a grandparent who has the financial means to retire and to support themselves and to take a full day to look after your children. That village is slowly dwindling away. And there is that societal conversation about the village dying because the village is still working because they have to still pay a mortgage, or cost of living is killing them, and grandparents are still working in cafes, they're still driving trucks, they're still doing their couple of days a week to sustain themselves. Um, so that village can't look after their grandchildren for free as much as they would like to. And that that is a privilege to have a grandparent be able to look after your children, because that doesn't exist anymore. And to your point, Todd, about how things have changed, we know that a generation ago, 2 in 10 families had double income parents working a job, both working to sustain an income for their family. Today, it's 7 in 10. So that is a massive jump from 2 in 10 to 7 in 10 in one generation, because parents need to work, and to work, they need childcare.
Yeah. Maddie, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
No, exactly what you said, Todd, which is families have changed since you grew up and since we all grew up. Both parents are working, and it's either out of need because cost of living is going up, not down, or because women want to be in the workforce. And I don't think women should have to choose between having a career and being, a mum.
Yeah, the dynamics have definitely changed. But as you touched on, Jen, the ratio of earnings to the cost of living is just skyrocketed. And it's just unaffordable to be able to, without two parents working. And let's be honest, a lot of both parents are working more than one job each just to put food on the table, which then, yeah.
I was gonna say the other thing is, we talked about the lack of flexibility with the childcare system. Then there's parents like shift workers or FIFO workers who are paying daycare when they're actually at home because they need to keep those spots. So, talk about cost of living pressures, paying for a service you don't actually need because there's no flexibility in the system.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to talk about the current model here, but also I'd like to perhaps get some insights into your research around models in other countries. But right now, childcare subsidies, they go directly to approved providers, and that's a win for them, right? Because as you said, if you don't keep your slot, you're out, and they're still clipping the ticket. But for many families, particularly those who work outside 9 to 5, if you just as you just mentioned, or in rural areas and regional areas, that doesn't work. Could you talk about, and I'm sure you've had this with all the people you've interacted with and had feedback from, but could you talk a bit about the families that get left behind?
Yeah, there are, I think people listening to this podcast would probably be shocked to know how many groups of Australians are left behind in the system and are locked out of it. And there are, the first place you go to is rural and regional families, exactly as you say. And a lot of families who are on farms now need an off-farm income. They can't sustain what they need to have on their property or in their lifestyle to be able to make ends meet. And so those people are looking for off-farm incomes, but they can't access a childcare centre. They've got one childcare centre and the list is 3 years long. The wait list is huge. And so for rural families, they're in childcare deserts where there is limited or no care. When you think about other families that this impacts, there are people with those immunocompromised children. There are, as Maddie said, there are people who are FIFO workers. There are single parents who are on split custody rosters who continue to pay for childcare centres. But people who aren't using childcare aren't using it for a wide range of reasons, whether that be medical, whether it be personal choice, or whether it be the fact that they can't access the centre itself. Where what we're asking for in terms of the model is not to change the model as it currently stands, but to have more choice. So for those families who can't access a centre or childcare doesn't fit with their lifestyle and their work schedule, that they have more choice in that system.
I think Todd, you mentioned the families that are being left behind, and we've talked a fair bit about the parents who are at work and the kids, but to Jen's point earlier about the village, Imagine the grandparents and, everyone's seen the joy that grandparents get when they're hanging out with their grandchildren, taking them to the park, buying them a present, everything like that. Imagine being able to include them in that sector of society where they can be paid, for example, to look after their grandkids. Those grandparents have then got an extra source of income, so they're contributing to the economy. It might mean that they're going to a different healthcare provider because they can mean it. It might mean they're getting more regular checkups. All the flow-on benefits that happen to an aging population when they've got that little bit extra income too.
Yeah, and that's really important. Like you talk about those flow-on effects, like health, be it physical and mental health, not just of the of the children, but the entire family unit. We know what stress can do to people, and if people are stressing about
Absolutely. And isolation.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a real big problem. That is a real big
Mm.
problem. The Productivity Commission's 2024 report found that availability, affordability, inclusivity, they're major barriers, as you mentioned. Do those findings reflect what you're hearing from families?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think what we can say very clearly is that the childcare system as it currently stands needs to be reformed. We can see that there are issues in terms of safety, and that's evident in the allegations that have come out over years now, but it is consistent. It's every single day there is a news story about an issue or an allegation in childcare in this country. So we can say very, very clearly that the system needs reform. That also goes to those things of availability, affordability, and inclusivity being major barriers for people. When you talk about affordability, I think the government of the day, the Albanese government, has done a very good job of subsidising the system to make it affordable for families as much as they can at this point. So for some families, they get a 90% subsidy on their childcare. And depending on where you live, you can be paying upwards of $250 a day for your childcare centre. So there is a real argument to be made about for-profit childcare centres, and that is a long-term reform and how the government deals with that. I hope it's on the agenda. For-profit childcare centres are making a lot of money in this sector, and that is making it less affordable for families, but the government does subsidise to quite a high level for families. But the inclusivity part is the biggest part that I think that we need to be having a national conversation about, because when you talk about inclusivity and universal as the word that's being used for reform around childcare, what universal to me means is all types of care. Whereas in this type of universal model, it is universal in the sense of all children can only go to one place. And that isn't really what a definition of universal is. Universal childcare really should be that inclusivity part of having all elements of care being subsidised to allow families that choice and flexibility that they ultimately need.
I think on productivity, Tom, the other thing we haven't touched on is sicknesses. I have a mums group on Instagram, and I think every second meme or reel we send each other is joking about daycare sickness and how much it goes through your entire family, how quickly and how much time it is. Imagine a world where you had someone who could provide care in your house for your kids, right? Your child's got a runny nose, you leave them at home. They don't then spread it to the entire daycare center because the days we lose, and the numbers say it costs $33 billion every year to our economy from unplanned absences from the workforce because you've got to deal with sicknesses.
Wow, that is huge. That's a big number.
Yeah. Yeah. But every mum knows it. Every mum knows that this is actually that's it almost feels like a small number compared to when you're living in it and you've got gastro for the third time. And it's, the first when you walk into work from coming back from maternity leave, the first thing people say to you is, "Oh, well, get ready for the next 12 months. You're not going to be here because you're going to be sick." So I think it's actually it's both frustrating and sad and has almost become it's a meme now, according to Maddie's Instagram group too.
It is. I was going to say we've almost stopped fighting it. It's just oh well, this is business as usual. We are our whole household. Every time a child starts in daycare, we're going to spend 12 months being sick. That's you know, why is that acceptable?
Yeah, Amy in our group, she'll probably be able she won't mind me telling you this story, but one of the things for her was she was using daycare for her daughter Adelaide, and she was going through IVF, to try and have a second baby, and, right before her, embryo transfer, she was knocked down with gastro, and her doctor actually said to her, "You need to make a choice. What is it? Do you want to expand your family? And something has to give. You can't continue to be this sick to go through this treatment." So that's another family who are facing a decision to leave childcare, and she's not the only one. That's not a rarity. So
Wow. Well, I can ladies, I can tell you with a 12 and a 9-year-old, the sickness doesn't stop. It's all ahead of you. It's all ahead of you. But you're right about the productivity bit. And look, not every family is the same either, right? So I'm very fortunate enough, you know, my wife works 2 days a week, and so there's flexibility. But when she's working, if one of the boys is sick, which has happened a lot the last few weeks, I can just drop the tools. But that's only because I've got my own business. But if you've got 2 people, salaried employees who have to work, it's not even 9 to 5 anymore. Um, yes, I guess there's a bit of flexibility in that the whole work from home piece, but that still affects productivity. If you're running around having to look up because your kids come first, you can't. Anyone who works for me, it's family first, and so you've got to have that flexibility as an employer these days, but not all employers do. And so what gives? That's a tough one. You got to put.
women leave the workforce.
Well, and yeah, and that's not cool for anyone. Not cool for anyone. Crikeys. Well, ladies, tell me, and Maddie, you've obviously had a lot of experience or had a lot of experience in politics as well and understanding how it works. But policymakers they often justify the current model and saying it supports workforce participation. But when access is patchy and hours are limited, is the system really delivering productivity?
I don't think so, and I think from the conversations we had, there was a big influx of women and mums into the new parliament, which I think was fantastic to see. But they are say what you like about politicians, but it's a 7 day a week and it's 24 hours a day and it's relentless. And I think that a lot of those new mums in parliament are actually finding that daycare doesn't even support them, and they're at the top of the pyramid. So if anyone can bring about change, it's them, and it's a change that's going to work best for them. I think to get policy change, we've got to be really loud, and that means getting more petition numbers, and it means getting more media. We're open to conversations, and like Jen said, we've had some conversations in Canberra about how this gets delivered and what model we use. We're open to feedback on that, but we're not going away.
That's great, and sounds like you've got a vocal supporter in the background too.
Yes, yes. And when you think about when you talk about Canberra, we were actually really surprised. We met with a politician down there who has a young baby, and herself, and she's a senator, and she has access to a childcare centre within Parliament House. So what that gives her as a parent is she can leave her child at that centre where she can see everything. She can walk down and look down onto the grounds where they're playing. She can go in and breastfeed. She can go in and feed her baby at any point she wants during her workday. And that level of accessibility is not something that normal parents can access. So when the politicians in Canberra can see the benefit of having that ability to deliver their one-on-one care while they work, we really would like that opportunity for all parents as well.
Yeah, I mean, that would be wonderful, and from memory, when Campbell Newman was the Queensland Premier, he started trying to implement similar, processes, in state government, buildings. I could be off the mark here, but I just have this memory that, obviously, the state government's one of the biggest employers of people in Queensland, um, and that, there was a cost to that, but at the same time it was all about, making sure that if need be, parents could keep an eye on their children if need be and have them close by instead of driving 300 kilometres each way, like you said, or 100 to drop them off and pick them up. And so there's a lot of benefit to that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we need to acknowledge is as parents, we want to be around our children. And that they talk about the first 1,000 days of a person's life and the development that a child goes through during that period. But also, as a mum, I don't think you could find a parent that could say they had a great time dropping their child off at childcare for the first time. I think everyone finds that to be a hugely traumatic experience because you are putting your most precious person into the trust of someone that you ultimately don't know. And for a lot of people, they get to know those carers, and they're lucky to have childcare carers who stay in their roles for a long time. But for our family, when I first used a childcare centre, I didn't know the people at the end of the day because there was such a high changeover of staff. So that we also have to acknowledge that it's stressful for parents to be putting their kids into childcare earlier and earlier than they would potentially want to be because they need to go back to work to earn an income.
And what you said earlier, Todd, I think you're quite right. The Queensland government under Campbell did try and introduce some changes. And one of the things that they were pushing at the time, and I remember it because it was when I started planning a family, but they were looking at having spaces in the workplace where women could breastfeed, either bring their kids in and, pick them up from a daycare centre in the city and breastfeed, or they could express milk and have rooms like that. And that's something that we don't talk about very often, or the logistics that come with women going back to work. And I know they used to have a childcare centre in City Hall as well. So, same thing, everyone could keep their kids nice and close. And we are the first generation, maybe second generation, where women want to have it all. And we should be able to. We should be able to work and have our kids close at the same time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It makes so much more sense. That's it for this episode of the VAXA Bureau Intelligence Optimised podcast. If you found value here, subscribe, rate the show, and share it with someone building the future of critical industry. The path of leadership may be solitary, but the future of leadership is coactive intelligence. Be ready for today, be prepared for tomorrow.